Should you let AI manage your finances? That is a question that is on a lot of people's minds right now. And I've seen different analysts cover that question. I've seen different reporters, different YouTubers, and it all kind of stems from the fact that recently OpenAI announced that they were going to be severely expanding the financial capabilities of ChatGPT, specifically to pro plan users. Now, this is actually a brilliant idea from OpenAI, as already hundreds of millions of users were already using AI for budgeting needs or personal questions around finance or specifically hot stock tips. But now they're going to build this into part of their actual subscription model. So, with this being a hot topic, I've compiled my 2 cents, and today I'm going to be discussing why I think the utilization of AI for financial support or financial planning questions is actually a really good thing. So without further ado, let's get into the video. For context on where I'm personally coming from, I'm a college student with a double major in finance and economics, and I've also finished my minor in financial planning, which would let me sit for the CFP exam, basically the end all be all certification for financial planning. So and there have definitely been times in my journey where I highly considered potentially becoming a financial planner. After all, I completed a very specialized minor for it. But some of the issues that kind of hold me up on trying to make that jump and become a financial planner are some of the reasons I actually think having AI do some of the job is a great idea. I think the biggest issue with the question of should AI manage your finances is we frame it like it's a simple question between should AI do it or the alternative, should a human do it? But this isn't really the case for all that many people, as I'm going to cover later on in the video. Instead, it's a more nuanced question. I mean, if we go back to that question of AI or a human, I would be hesitant, but I would put my money on you should go for a human individual. But underneath the surface of that simple answer, there's a lot of buts and considerations and a lot of picking through different talent to find the right person that make it to where it's a little bit of a harder answer to just say than go for a concrete one size fits all answer. The first main issue we have when picking a financial advisor, planner, whatever the case may be, is that there is a severe difference in quality amongst the industry. On one end of the spectrum, you have people who parade themselves as even financial coaches, which it's like anyone could call themselves a financial coach. I could tomorrow. And they basically run glorified Ponzi schemes. And then on the other hand, you have people who take a fiduciary duty very seriously. They probably have certifications and they ensure that they're keeping up with the latest trends and making it to where they can actually apply that knowledge into their clients' recommendations and plans. That being said, one of the unfortunate things is that it requires a certain amount of knowledge to actually be able to identify qualified candidates for a financial planner or financial advisor role. And at the same time, this kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense because a lot of these people, they're showing up in times of need. That's typically when you see people try and seek out professional help. And it's hard to like necessarily without having full background knowledge kind of screen through the plethora of terrible financial picks, the glorified insurance salesmen parading around as financial advisors or planners, the commission hungry people who are just there to sell you products and nothing more, and try and find a highly qualified good person who's going to do their job at a reasonable price and do more than just the bare minimum, which, as I'll talk about, the bare minimum is, I mean, it's in the name bare minimum. It's quite easy, but sadly, also at times, the bare minimum can actually be better than what some of the lower quality advisors and planners will do for you. The second biggest issue is it's not simply enough to find a highly qualified candidate to become your financial planner. One of the things that really kind of turned me off from trying to become a financial planner is that the majority of the really good firms that they check all of the boxes you would want. They have teams of CFPs, CFAs, even some CPAs typically if you also want to have some in-depth tax thing. They kind of do the whole process. They aren't just solely focused on one area like investments. I know I tend to talk about investments a lot because I really like it, but they focus on the whole picture. The problem is that when you get to these types of companies, typically they require their clients to bring a significant sum of money to the table. So, for instance, a lot of the companies that I've talked to, it'll be a $500,000 minimum in investable assets, or $1 million isn't out of the picture. A lot of people do that, or even higher than that. And this is just to get the good, high quality people you've found. So, it's not so much that financial planning and financial advising right now are helping people achieve their financial goals. It's almost like helping people who are already rich become even richer. And it's a good thing to aspire to be able to get to that high quality financial planner. But in the meantime, there's kind of this weird middle area where there aren't as many highly qualified people taking the middle category because you're giving up a significant sum of money. So at one point, I wish I could just like be like, oh, it's all the financial planners' faults. They're just way too greedy. But at the same times, they're trying to start their own lives. They have their own goals. They have their own families to take care of. And it can come at a significant pay cut to kind of pick up the middle class of people where they're really growing and you're trying to help them achieve their financial goals versus people who already have all of those assets. It's a much safer bet for them. So there's kind of this middle area that just basically gets neglected. And it also happens in the much earlier area too. Like people just starting out can also kind of end up in this little neglected area where the people who are willing to take them on basically weren't cut out necessarily to get as much pay taking on the massive whales of clients. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the people in this space are terrible by any means, but that just means that there's a large inflow of people who are not good at their job towards this client base because typically this is where people go when they're just starting out, or this is the type of people where they try and sell products, whatever the case may be. For the average person who doesn't have a complex plan and doesn't bring 1 million plus in investable assets to the table, this system doesn't only not make sense, it's fundamentally broken. It kind of leaves behind like a whole slew of people, probably the majority of the population, who want financial help. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I look at a solution like ChatGPT. And while it's not going to be probably on par with a financial planner of the highest echelon, it can definitely get them in the right direction where otherwise their financial help would have been either people who are just looking solely off of profiting them without making their clients any better off, or just Googling and trying to struggle on their own. Now, I'm going to spill a little bit of an industry secret. There is a substantial portion of the financial planning, financial advising space that just simply uses two software programs and just runs with the recommendations off of those. It's kind of funny. Like a lot of your job as a planner could just be punching in inputs into it's called either Money Guide Pro or eMoney. And a lot of the not as qualified people who don't necessarily add value will just spit out those recommendations that the software recommends as their own and just move on. Like, it's kind of funny how easy it is at this point to create a financial plan. And I've watched people in my family who are looking at potentially going in to talk to financial planners and get help with things. And a lot of the opening intake where they're meeting clients really can just boil down to, hey, so how much do you make a year? What year do you think you're going to retire? How long do you think you're going to continue to live? Can you give me a rundown of your assets? And all the while, they're just punching this into Money Guide Pro so that then they can spit out those recommendations and seem really smart to people who aren't necessarily in the know how. Now, of course, there are the upper echelon who will take a look at this plan, kind of see which recommendations it's recommending and why, and go with the better ones and then try and add their own 2 cents and thoughts. But you really could kind of get away being a middle of the pack, mediocre financial planner just going with these two software programs. Now, what kind of sucks on a client end is these programs live in the space where it's just expensive enough to not make sense for the individual clients to just get the software and do it themselves, but they're cheap enough that the financial planners who have multiple clients, it makes sense for them. So they kind of live in this weird space that kind of de incentivizes people trying to go get professional software for their own use cases because it's at that point it's expensive enough to not warrant it. But it is kind of upsetting that, again, in this middle of the road area, like richer clients who had all of the excess resources and had a big enough portfolio and net worth for it to make sense, probably could benefit from, if they were going to go with a mediocre-ish quality financial planner, just skipping that altogether and just getting their own financial planning software. But again, middle and lower class people who want help and want guidance, it there isn't really a great middle of the road area. Now, obviously, based on what I've been laying out and what I've been saying, there's a whole giant portion of the market that either A, isn't receiving good financial advice, or B, quite frankly, can't because they don't have enough in assets or net worth or whatever the case may be. And this is definitely a good area where, for financial support, a software or a program, or in this instance, what I'm talking about, ChatGPT, could give them a step in the right direction. I mean, obviously, ChatGPT isn't going to be a one size fits all answer for some of the reasons I'm going to discuss, but it's definitely a good step in the right direction. One of the reasons I really like the utilization of AI for financial support questions is that the majority of people don't use it for complex problems. This can be really well shown by the two most common use cases for AI, those being budgeting questions and, of course, questions on how to help with investments. For me, if users were to have more complex issues that would require nuanced answers or expert knowledge of very niche fields, then I would be more inclined to pivot away from the utilization of AI. But as is, most people would benefit just using it for a general guidance. Now, certainly, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for ChatGPT. AI at this point still can have hallucinations. And so it's important to, if any of the recommendations don't make sense to you, or if anything is sticking out when you're prompting it, it's still important to ask for the rationale behind those decisions, read through the rationale, and if it doesn't make sense, don't go for it. I mean, for instance, if AI was to tell you to put 100% of your investable assets into meme coins, and you had asked for how to safely diversify a portfolio for sustainable growth into the future, that would be something that would raise red flags, and you shouldn't just take it all at once. Now, it is good, and OpenAI did kind of proactively think ahead on some of these situations where when you link your different accounts, it's not that ChatGPT can just go act on it, basically. It'll give you recommendations, and then you have to kind of go act them out. So there is a lot of opportunity to question it. Now, if for some reason they were like, and now we've allowed it to actually act out these issues, that would raise a lot of red flags and definitely be a concern. But for this instance right now, it acts more of just like a visualizer for things, and then it can kind of look into your issues and help you plan it accordingly. Now, one area of the AI utilization for financial support I really like is in the transparency. And I don't necessarily mean on OpenAI's end, I mean on the client's end. A big issue in financial planning, and any guest speaker I've had in a club or any professional I've talked to has faced a similar issue at some point, is that sometimes your clients just don't want to be fully transparent about their situations. Maybe it's a cultural thing, but I've definitely witnessed that money conversations aren't necessarily commonplace. Like, a lot of people act weird talking about how much they make, or different decisions they're making, or how much they have in retirement accounts, or whatever the case may be. And so there's kind of this weird thing where people will sometimes make their situation sound better, or say what they think the person wants to hear, because well, they're scared of being judged. And it can be embarrassing, definitely. Like if you're trying to make all of these financial decisions and you never really learned anything in school because it wasn't really built out or fleshed out enough in what you did learn, then it can be really embarrassing to realize you've made mistakes and have a professional kind of pick holes and point at the mistakes you've made. So there definitely can be, I think, more transparency with a thing like ChatGPT because you don't have to look at a person and see potential judgment on the other end if you're like really in need of help. And again, as I've talked about, a lot of people kind of make these decisions and seek out help when they really need it, when there's something going wrong. And I think ChatGPT would get a lot more transparency out of its clients because at the end of the day, your plan and support can only be as good as what you're actually telling to your advisor. Now, on the flip side of that equation, ChatGPT isn't going to necessarily be as good as what I would consider kind of the human end of the skills. In a market downturn or something like that, it may not do as good of a job talking you off a ledge when you're sitting there and you're like, hey, should I liquidate all of my stocks because the market's down 10%? I personally think a person would do a much better job kind of talking you down, using rationale and sense behind it versus something that at the end of the day still can kind of just agree with the things you're saying. And you do it sometimes need somebody to disagree with your opinions in order to get to the best results. So, overall, I definitely think there are still benefits to having the humans. It's just at what cost? Similarly, and some of the things that I don't think AI is going to be able to do, when you do kind of break out of the simple questions and get to more of the complex issues, there's going to be a lot of state specific things or specific niche tax questions or whatever the case may be. If you have those arise, AI isn't going to necessarily do as good of a job as a financial planner that kind of specializes in that area. It's in a similar sense to where you simply can't Google every single question ever. There are going to be some random weird life events that happen to you that you won't necessarily find a good answer for, and that is where a human will excel in your financial plan. But again, there are definitely things that you kind of have to get up to that point, right? And if you're just simple and understandable, then ChatGPT is going to excel at that part. Overall, I'm kind of optimistic about the utilization of AI in financial support or financial planning or whatever the case may be. I'm somebody who truly believes that competition brings out the best of things. And with an industry that can be kind of flawed and not necessarily do what you might expect or want it to do, I definitely think that a increase in competition will require much of the market to actually kind of prioritize again some of the people who don't necessarily bring as much assets to the table, right? Like the people who truly need the financial support and need help achieving their goals, retiring, sending kids to college, things of that nature. The kind of middle area that at times can be left behind by the industry. I think increased competition with ChatGPT or whatever LLM at this point will definitely be a good thing and require major firms to look into trying to better appease this crowd than just simply prioritize kind of the high end wealth management roles. And again, as I've made it clear multiple times in this video, there definitely does become a point where you benefit from having a person who can answer the more complex issues. I wish it was kind of like a definitive, this is a number or this is the case when you need that, but it can vary wildly depending on the situation because, well, human lives vary wildly depending on who's kind of making the decisions. So there definitely does become a point, but for that growing and middle of the pack area, you probably would be just as well off getting generalized advice from an LLM versus somebody who doesn't necessarily care as much about your outcomes versus trying to appease someone who's super wealthy or pick up mass amounts in their AUM. Overall, the main emphasis right now should be pretty much about empowerment. You should seek out that financial support and advice and whatever you can. I don't necessarily want you to think that, oh, because I might not necessarily get the highest quality of financial planners or financial advisors, I shouldn't go to ChatGPT. It's not like that at all. I basically want pretty much everyone to be empowered to make better financial situations and achieve financial freedom. And for a lot of people, ChatGPT will do a sufficient enough job kind of getting you started down the path where you can actually kind of achieve those goals. And maybe once you get to the point where you need it, you switch over to a high end professional that you've screened and you are fully sure of their capabilities. But overall, that's kind of just my opinions and thoughts as to whether or not you should utilize AI in your financial decisions. I really appreciate you checking out this video. Thank you so much.